Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and I've been pondering yet again what would happen if there was just a simple spelling error in the publicity for a well-known musical. We might get the rather uninspiring 7 Bribes for 7 Brothers. I don't know what the plot for that story would be like, but it does sound as though it would have a good payoff. Anyway, let's leave that little piece of nonsense well behind and get into the meat and potatoes of the day, to nearly quote Thomas Fats Waller. And I do hope that you enjoyed the sultry opening to today's episode. That's a lovely piece of music in its own right, and it's the introduction to a song that you'll hear a little later in the programme. So, let's get down to the order of the day. Today, I had the very great pleasure of presenting to you the full interview that I conducted with noted British songwriter Sue Casson, who has brought me so much pleasure over many years. Her songwriting skills are really second to none, and every show that she presents has brought me unalloyed joy, frankly. The quality of the songwriting is magnificent, the performances are always magnificent, and the thoughtfulness in writing is also magnificent, as I hope will come across in today's conversation. Now, at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, Sue was presenting Two Tigers, a Modernist Musical, as it was subtitled, which was a musical drama about 2 literary pioneers. Because 2023 marked the centenary of the death of Katherine Mansfield, a trailblazing modernist writer born in New Zealand. The musical Two Tigers tells the story of her brief but extraordinary life and her turbulent love affair with editor John Middleton Murray, who ensured her legacy. And what's particularly interesting about this musical, beyond the fact that it's terrific, is the fact that this award-winning musical was originally staged to mark the centenary of the year of the birth of Katherine Mansfield. And this newly reimagined version, which is the one that you could have seen at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, was produced a lifetime on, as Sue puts it, to mark the centenary year of her death. And indeed, this episode is being broadcast in October of this year, because the 14th of October marks the 135th birthday of Katherine Mansfield. So it's entirely appropriate that we should be talking about this wonderful new musical, Two Tigers, now. Now, the show was written by Sue. It was directed by Tom Blackmore, and you'll be hearing about him briefly in the conversation. And it was Sue's daughter Lily who was playing Katherine, and rather well, I should say. She has a very nice singing voice. And so in a minute we'll hear a discussion about why Katherine Mansfield is a worthy recipient of a musical in her own right, and the process Sue has used to write and then rewrite a musical, to retool it, if you like, for slightly different purposes, and how Sue has sort of turned it inside out to create a totally different piece of art, which actually is more reflective of the modernist tradition. So it is art reflecting life, reflecting art. And Sue will also be talking, as the master craftsman that she is, in terms of songwriting, about how one writes a song that reflects the work and legacy of an individual in a way that is satisfying and authentic. Because we've all seen musical shows about people where existing songs, sometimes from their own catalogue, have been slightly shoehorned in to match a biographical detail, and it doesn't quite fit. That's not the case here with Two Tigers. However, that's quite enough conversation from me. It doesn't need me to explain what's going on. Much more appropriate will be to hear the conversation that I conducted with Sue. Now, just a couple of notes. Sue has kindly allowed us to play a couple of songs from the score of the show Two Tigers. So what you'll be getting will be a song from the show Two Tigers, followed by an in-depth conversation with the wonderful Sue Casson. And then finally a second song from the show that was recorded a few years ago. And the 2 songs alone show you how versatile Sue can be. So, let's start with this conversation about Two Tigers, a modernist musical. A musical about the life of the modernist writer Katherine Mansfield.
Home is the place where the wind blows southerly, nestling close in the bay. Into the distance a stream flows, silently cast silver whispers of spray. Endless plains beneath a cloud-flecked sky. There is where my child's spirit flies. Spirit flies away. Far in the wildness a bush burns, shadowless, fringing a meadow of gold. Down in the valley the mood turns, emptiness, mist rising mauve from the cold. Thundering silence hangs beneath the hill. Pearls of sunlight breaking through the chill, still light, making my soul take flight. Spirit flies away, home to the nestling bay. Away, away.
So I am Sue Casson, writer of Two Tigers.
Now, Two Tigers has a subtitle which I think we need to unpack before we go any further, before we look at this fabulous show. It is actually a genuinely fabulous show. I really enjoyed it. And as always, Sue, and I wanted to lay my cards on the table early on, it's beguiling and the music in particular is just superb. But the piece overall is excellent, but it has a subtitle, a modernist musical. Now, I think we probably need to explain the reasoning for that, because actually, funny enough, it could take you off in a number of directions, because modernism is a movement, or was a movement.
Yeah.
It's a widely understood movement at one level. People think of buildings.
Yes.
And to a lesser degree, writing and other music and things like that. But actually, it's specific here, isn't it? It's about a person who's really important in the modernist movement.
Yes. There's a point in the show when we say that we now think of Katherine Mansfield as...
And she's the principal person the show's about.
The principal person about this show. It's her centenary this year. We would call it a modernist movement. And in fact, this is something that's actually only really happened, I think, crystallised in the last 35 years since we last did the show. Because I think the first time we did the show, which was actually for the anniversary of her birth...
And this is the centenary of her death, isn't it, unfortunately?
Yes. Yeah. So we've only 35 years in her life. And I think that at that time, modernism was not a sort of a word that people used perhaps as widely as they do now. Whereas now, people sort of think as Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, T.S. Eliot. People who wrote in a sort of string of moments style. That's the sort of the thing about modernism, is that they've cast off that Victorian idea of there being a straight narrative with a godlike author, and one thing leads to another, and the author sees all and explains all. So it's from the inside rather than the outside. That's what modernism's about, is about experiencing the moment and trying to fix it on the page. And because people's lives are so messy, often the narrative is a little bit slipshod, because it's what occurs to you in that moment. I mean, Virginia Woolf, when she wrote Mrs. Dalloway, was writing about one day and the things that happened in one day, and the same thing happens in Ulysses, and the day is packed with incident, but it's not, sort of beginning, middle and end. Yeah. So when we came back to the musical, and we really did rip the heart out of it. Actually, we put it back to front and inside out. I mean, it's a totally different show to what it was for her birth. That was, in fact, ironically, very much from the outside, because we had a whole series of characters that were close to Katherine Mansfield, like D.H. Lawrence and Mark Gertler, the artist, and, sort of came through her life. And this time, I feel it's a very much more intimate story, and it also has very much more of her writing at the centre of it, which is, last time I thought perhaps we could dramatise the writing and bring it to life that way, and this time I think there's nothing replaces the words, really.
It's odd, isn't it? Because this is art reflecting life, reflecting art, oddly, which is that because she dies young, and she only has a certain amount of work under her belt, of course, and suffers ill health, it is her sort of literary executor, the other tiger of the Two Tigers title,
yes,
who then goes on to publish almost everything she's written. And in a way, that is... who she is becomes what she has written, and therefore to put what she has written in the heart of your revised musical is to put her in the heart of your revised musical, which is as it should be, because the authentic her is her writing in whatever form, whether it be private or public.
Yeah.
So I can absolutely understand. There's no wrong way of doing a bio-musical, but we've all seen, particularly as singers, by the way, I've seen quite a lot of those over the years, where people will tell the story of the person in question and then illustrate it with a song from their life which they're associated with, or songs from their life that they're associated with, which sort of fit the plot point as far as possible, or the plot has been moved ever so slightly to match the song.
Yes.
Because we're talking about prose here, for the most part.
Yeah.
And that allows you to be free of that kind of constraint. Or does it, actually? This is interesting. Songs about musicals, composers, singers, as I say, sort of fits into their musical work. This is a prose work, but you're a great composer. You're bringing the musical element to... Well, you are. Stop wriggling. But as a talented craftsperson, you know what you're doing. But is it? I suppose this is a terrible question because I'm taking such a long time to build up to it. But what I suppose I'm saying is, because the source material, the Katherine Mansfield elements are her text, her prose. Where does that leave you as a songwriter?
I think because she's a wonderful crafter of phrases, I have borrowed from her writing to actually insert in the lyrics quite freely. And because her husband, John Middleton Murray, who was also the executor, as you say, was also a writer, a prolific writer, and in their day, he was the one who had the power and who had the reputation. He was editor of literary magazines, he wrote critical works about Dostoevsky and Shakespeare and things, as well as writing... I didn't know they'd met. 2 seconds. And he also wrote novels, he tried to write, and he also wrote poetry.
So oddly, he had the leverage, but she had slightly more quality, I think, with history, would argue.
I think even he knew that.
Yes.
I think he was discerning enough to know that she was something really special. And that's quite tough, I think, because he was a man in a man's world. And
we were talking the 20s and 30s as the principal period.
Very much so, yeah. And I think...
20s, really.
He so much wanted to be an artist. He really, really wanted to be an artist. And somehow he was all a bit buttoned up, and he was the one with the Oxford education. He was the Oxford scholarship boy. And here was someone who'd never been near anywhere other than a school, and was turning out these extraordinary pieces that were groundbreaking in their form and style. But rather than feeling... sort of, because he loved her so much, rather than feeling that he was going to be jealous of that, he actually did everything he could to get her name out there. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think people are so... I say people... many people don't even know who Katherine Mansfield is. Those who know who Katherine Mansfield is, the biographers and the academics, are very dismissive of Murray and very...
And you mentioned this in the piece.
Very cross with him. They're cross with him because, unlike Leonard Woolf, he didn't look after Katherine.
As a person.
He found the whole illness thing really difficult to deal with. His brother, actually, I listened to an interview with his brother that was around, that was recommended to me on Twitter. You know, what wonderful resource that is. And his brother Richard, who also knew Katherine, said he recognised how poorly he'd managed with Katherine, that when his next wife, how bad luck is this, his next wife got tuberculosis.
Oh, really?
And,
the same disease? Yes.
Same disease, and he said he was absolutely wonderful with her. It was like paying forward. It was like he learned what he'd done wrong and he tried to put it right.
So in a way, that's personal redemption for him to a degree.
Yeah.
And he redeemed himself with Katherine, at least as her literary.
Well, that's another thing, you see, that they're very cross about. Because they think that he was. I mean, I touch on that in the critique song, because they don't like the idea that he published so widely. I mean, at the time, the contemporaries were saying, but goodness, you're telling all her secrets. Well, much she cares now, I should say. And the other
You mean publishing the private correspondence and
exactly,
things? Exactly. Isn't that just social prudery, though, in a way?
Well, yes, and I suppose you're looking back, aren't you? What I find very extraordinary, though, again, going to Virginia Woolf, and Virginia Woolf actually knew Katherine. They had wonderful conversations about their art together, and Virginia Woolf said of Katherine Mansfield that her writing was the only writing she was jealous of, ever felt jealous of.
There's a compliment.
So they came from a very similar purpose in what they were trying to achieve in their writing. But Leonard published Virginia's diaries, and we all say what a wonderful resource this is now to see the writer at work and things. And Murray did it 10 years earlier and is sneered at. And he's sneered at for doing it, and then he's sneered at for what he left out, and then he's sneered at for doing it all. And it's as if everybody wants to turn him into a punch bag, and I don't really understand why, because being who she was, she'd never got a name out there at all without him. She just wouldn't be known of.
So he is the one who sort of helped posthumously retain her reputation and in some way burnished it, at the expense of his own, as it turns out.
Yes.
I mean, that's quite an interesting dichotomy, isn't it? The ups and downs. I mean, as you quite rightly point out, as she passed, it's all slightly immaterial.
Well, yeah, I think so.
But you said that you selected and chose elements of the writing in order to turn them into songs or include bits into songs. You know, songwriting is a serpentine skill, it seems to me, and there are lots of different ways of doing it. Did you find yourself more drawn to phrases which you could then use in a song or put phrases together, or did you find a concept in her writing that actually you wanted to elaborate? Or is it a bit of column A and a bit of column B?
Tick both boxes, I think. I mean, with Home, which opens the show, she went on a sort of trip before she left New Zealand. Her father really didn't want her to leave New Zealand forever. He'd educated all three of his daughters in London at Queen's College, which was quite a progressive school. And she came home to New Zealand and immediately felt bound and shackled by colonial society and the expectations of what life was going to be for her there.
Less opportunity in New Zealand at that time than even in London.
Yes, very much so. And I think also, sort of very much you marry well and,
you stop writing.
You stop writing, or, you do it as a little pastime or whatever. And she found all of that immensely frustrating. So almost from the moment she came back to New Zealand, she was sort of gagging to get back to London and where she saw life was. She loved London, actually. It was really, lifeblood to her. But
she has her own agency, doesn't she, actually, to be honest, at the end of the day? Or so she seems to me. She's a kind of proto-feminist in that sense. That, that actually she's not prepared to be shackled in quite the same way.
No, I think she's not.
She has a life which I think once would have been described as avant-garde.
Yes.
Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah. Yes, and her sisters had things to say about that as well. But her father was trying very hard to keep her there and sent her on this trip of the Urewera landscape. I've never been to New Zealand. It's meant to be very, very beautiful, and she kept a diary or a journal while she was there. She always wrote really beautifully about nature and about what she saw and the colours she saw and the smells. She's a very, very sensual writer. She just employs all the senses. So you smell it, you see it, you touch it, everything is there.
Because it's a true experience, isn't it? And
it is.
If what you were saying, what you say in the piece later on about capturing that moment and then recording it on a page is what she did. She can transmute real life into the record of real life.
Yes.
Almost like a photograph, but with more evocation, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. As if you're feeling it as well as seeing it.
Yes.
And this was her first sort of experience, I suppose, of doing that in an extended way. And that has been published as well, actually, the Urewera Diaries, with some beautiful watercolours, I think. But that transmutes very well into a line from a song, because there's just little sort of observations about the colours and the mist rising and the colours on the mountains and stuff that you can just lift and sort of put in there. And the same was true when she was writing about Francis Carco, because she was obviously...
Her lover for a while.
Yes, yeah, very, very briefly.
Yes.
And I think when we came to it this time, last time we made much more of Francis Carco as a person. But I think actually, sadly for Francis Carco, he was more of a catalyst than anything else, because I think she was having a very difficult time. She had writer's block for a long period in her life, because her life was so busy and such a struggle, because she didn't have much money. She was given an allowance by her father once he came to terms with the idea of her coming across, but he never was lavish because he didn't really want her to be here, and the amount that she was picking up from her writing was not huge. So money was always a concern. She always wasn't living very nice places, and there was a lot going on in her life that made it difficult for her to focus and find that time, which ironically she found once she became ill. So in this, having had a horrible time and it being a struggle, the magazine going down and Murray being made bankrupt because of the magazine and the publisher running off.
Yes. Yes, it wasn't his fault, was it?
No, it wasn't. He was green behind the ears, and they actually published 5,000 of each copy, which was a ludicrous amount for the amount of circulation that they were going to get, and then he wanted them to pay for it all when the publisher absconded. But anyway, that's by the by. So when she fixed on Francis Carco, I think he was sort of a bohemian idea of what she thought Murray might have been.
Yes.
And it was a sort of... The important thing about it was that she felt love, and she felt that intoxication about love. And that then later, when she's in Bandol, she draws on that intoxication to actually produce something extraordinary in Je ne parle pas français. So when, as Tom was saying, when he was directing it this time, he was saying, well, I can't get it out of my mind. It's not him, actually, that she couldn't get out of her mind. What she couldn't get out, or what she was trying to get out and put on paper, was that rush, that burning that came with that experience that actually kick-started her writing and, sort of let it all pour out. Yeah.
Yes, it's sort of always what he represented rather than what he was.
Yeah. I mean, it was so short-lived, this affair. And
he was not a gentleman either, was he?
No, but I think...
I mean, there's a lovely tit-for-tat element to this, isn't there? That, yes, he published something of their relationship in his own inferior work, so why wouldn't she?
But really, the extraordinary thing about Francis Carco, about which we know nothing here, do we? We know even less than we know about Katherine Mansfield. He actually felt it was worthwhile, 10 years after her death, to write his memories of Katherine Mansfield, because she was obviously by that time getting to be well enough known for him to think, oh, well, it might be worth my, putting a few ideas on that. Yes, I think he was quite ruthless, actually. And
lost to history in many ways now.
Yes, yeah. I mean, he may be very big in France. I don't know, because I think, they're all still published in...
Oh, fair enough, yes. I mean, it shows my cultural ignorance in this sense, but certainly not in Britain, I would argue.
No, never made it over here.
So, did you encounter any difficulties with the prose? Or did you chime with it? Because you obviously chime with her writing, in general.
Last time, when I wanted to do something different, and I thought... Because what originally sort of drew me to Katherine Mansfield was that I thought short story, song, there is a kind of form constraint there, because in a short story you have very little time to create whatever it is you want to say, but you can say something very wide-reaching. I mean, that's what the critic said at the end, that something that actually is true of a whole life, or perhaps of life itself, in just that one little short story. And you can do the same in a song. You can, in 3 verses, put together some idea that actually makes people think and takes them beyond something.
It can be encompassing, can't it?
It can be encompassing. And so that was the original kick-off. And I very soon realised that it wasn't going to be possible to put a short story in a song. I mean, you've seen The Happy Prince, and The Happy Prince is 5 pages long, and that's a full-scale
and you made
musical.
Absolutely.
So,
and a cracking one at that.
So that was the kick-off.
Yeah.
And so then, having thought, well, we can't do that, we thought, well, what can we do? Can we dramatise it? Can we underscore it and dramatise it, which is what we ended up doing. And in fact, there's a TV dramatisation which stars Vanessa Redgrave as Katherine Mansfield and Jeremy Brett as John Livingston Murray, that was made. Annette Crosby is LM, and this was made in the 80s. It's all online now on YouTube. But what they tried to, it's really interesting because I didn't find it until after I'd written Two Tigers the first time.
Although in a way that might be good.
Yeah, I think it was good. But all the stories that they had picked out as a sort of, this tells you something about Katherine Mansfield and about her attitude to this, we'd done exactly the same thing. Exactly the same moments we'd picked out and dramatised.
It's nice to have that sense that other people consider those to be the sort of dramatic nexus points.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then, having watched it this time, I thought, actually, that's quite reductive. Because she wasn't writing about her life. She was writing about a feeling or a jealousy or a something that is in there, but no more than Prelude as autobiography about her family.
Yes.
Is this something which is a dramatisation of what she's done? I mean, in fact, Murray did dramatise their meeting, and those little bits that we have around the Two Tigers sequence, they are lifted directly from his novel about Katherine Mansfield called Between Two Worlds, and he writes about their conversations and recreates it on the page. But with her, she was a step. She took various bits from various places. She was more Magpie about it and made something more rounded. Yeah,
she is a fusion meal of her experiences in that sense.
Yeah, exactly. So when I heard her sisters talk, which also on this, another thing that's in the National Library of New Zealand, you can actually hear her sisters discussing her in 1963. Quite extraordinary. And the interviewer asks them about, Prelude, which was very loosely based on her life, her early life in New Zealand, and they say, well, it's not really Mum, it's not really Dad, because what she's done is quite cruel, because she was a satirist as well, and so. But I don't think that beyond it being a kick-off, I think she wanted to say something more about people's experiences. I don't think she was thinking this is a photograph of my mum. It's a photograph of her situation. It's a photograph of how colonial society was, and I'm going to say interesting things about how people interacted and what the class system was, and they didn't recognise it as such. They actually said it's something quite different, and I think that makes it greater, not lesser. That it wasn't just the innocent things that happened when I was with the family, but something, a step on.
Yes, so it's more than biography or autobiography. But there's also that possibility, isn't there? Because in my head, and I could be completely wrong about this, but that moved from the Victorian style of art, in the broadest sense actually, to the early 20th century, whether it be sort of vorticism in art or modernism in writing and then music and everywhere, is the desentimentalisation of things. Partly to bring it back to a level that we would actually recognise as being the way we live, because the Victorians over-sentimentalised.
Yes.
If you're able to address your own family situations, particularly the youthful ones, in an unsentimental way, that can be quite exposing. And it may well be that, and I don't know this, obviously I know nothing here, but the sisters might well have still be living with a sentimentalised version of their own lives.
Yeah.
And that actually it is quite accurate as well. I mean, I'm sure your point is rather more pointful.
I think what you're pointing up is the complexity, really.
Yes.
When you're talking about real people as a kick-off, that you're not just taking. I mean, you know, the number of dramas we see on TV where it says this is the known fictional character, absolutely nothing to do with anybody ever known and born or anything. And I think that it's very, very rare that that is the case, because obviously, you know, writers are magpies. They sort of take things from different places. They notice, you know, sort of the way somebody opens their egg, or the way that, you know, they sort of address somebody on the street, and they make a mental note about it.
And the good ones are psychologists, so they can make it fit.
Yes.
The lesser good ones just make you a rag bag of different things they've spotted.
Yes.
There has to be a cohesion, doesn't there?
There does, yeah.
Now, let's talk about the versatility of the score, if I may, because, you know, I can't sit here with Sue Casson and not talk about the music in its broadest sense. Well, no, but forgive me, you have a great gift. I don't think you've written anything I haven't enjoyed, and certainly I enjoyed every song in this piece, but the thing I adored, once again, was the broadness of the spectrum on which you can work. So you've got the evocative songs, you know, as you say, that very opening song where Katherine herself is singing about the beauty of nature, you know, that is beguiling, I think is the word. And then there are several songs where she sings on her own, but then, you know, and they I think in a sort of way represent her observing nature, her finding her feelings, her, you know, the interrogation of self and her experiences of the world that she wishes to make extrovert from her introspection, if that makes sense. And then when she starts interacting with other characters, so the Two Tiger song is a really good example of this, there's a change of pace, you know, so she meets Murray, and actually there's a kind of, you write duets terribly well, actually, I think is what I'm boiling this down to. I've noticed this in your other works as well. The single person songs are all fabulous, but the duets somehow spring, like Two Tigers, I suppose, but they really do. And there are several duets in this piece, and they're not at all the same. It would be ridiculous to suggest they were, but there is, you have a beautiful way of getting dialogue, of getting meaning, of getting interaction and relationship, because that's what a good duet should get across. And with a kind of blithe jauntiness, would that be fair? It's how it seems to me. There's a kind of upbeat nature, just to the... What I got was that Katherine comes alive in a different way in the company of others. You know.
I'm glad you got that. Because I think that, as you've said, she's kind of fixed in her words now. And one of the complaints of her dearest friends after she died was that Murray loved her so much, in a sense, that he wanted her to be perfect. And one of the things that they remembered about her so much was that she made people laugh, that she was very candid, and that she was outspoken and liked to shock people. And I mean, Leonard Woolf just said that she was the funniest person, that he just made him laugh and laugh. And I think that is missing from her writing, though I have tried to, in the little bits, pick out those bits, particularly in German Pension at the end there, her observations, which are quite cruel and à point. I think she was quite sparky, and if that sparkiness comes across in the duets, I'm delighted. I'm really delighted.
Oh, well, I think it does, yeah. No, she gives, well, to say she gives as good as she gets makes it sound like an antagonistic relationship. What it actually sort of comes across is that she's not demure. And she doesn't come across that way, and that is clearly not who she is, both in performance and in writing, as in your writing of the piece.
And Virginia Woolf didn't like that.
Well, she didn't.
No, she was very demure, Virginia Woolf, of course,
yes,
coming from a very different background.
Yeah.
And one of her first reactions to her was, what a shame she stinks like a civet cat and she, looks like a streetwalker. Because, she wore a fur coat and red lipstick, and she was a very fantastical person, and she built on that. She loved to play act and be someone.
There's a touch of look at me in that, though, perhaps, in a stilted society, which of course we can't forget is still the case, less stilted than the Victorians, but rules, and particularly for women, much more oppressive, really. So it is interesting that she was able to push at the envelope of social convention in that sense. Once again, this all comes. When I use the word proto-feminist, I use it purely to lodge it in the chronology of feminism in the 20th century. You know, I mean, she flowers before Dorothy L. Sayers turns up. You know, Dorothy L. Sayers turns up as a proto-feminist, I think, in the 20s and then the 30s.
Yes.
And then goes on to do amazing things, and have affairs, as it turns out. And you know,
yes.
I'm an enormous fan of Dorothy L. Sayers. Very different kettle of fish, but
similarly, you see, I mean, with Dorothy L. Sayers, if she is a feminist, it's not at the expense of her relationships with men, because the portrait of Peter Wimsey is a very loving portrait. I mean, it's he's a hero, and what is heroic about him is that he treats Harriet Vane as his equal.
Oh, I think it's one of the earliest equal male-female relationships in English literature.
Yes.
Yes.
And this was what...
literature in English.
This was what Catherine and Murray were striving for, that equality in their relationship, where there was no expectation that they wouldn't be intellectual equals.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, there's so much, even just this conversation as I'm wrapping things, but you know, the piece also, it does what it does, but you just think, I'd love to see the 2-hour version of it. Is there a 2-hour version of it, a 2-act version?
Well, there is definitely a longer version, because when we came to Edinburgh this time, we wanted to showcase it. We wanted to show the music in the best possible way that we could. And we've had we called it a reimagining all the way through. Yeah. It is a real reimagining, actually, because we've upended it. We've taken it from the inside to the outside. Yes. And now I would like to extend those 2 tiger sequences, which were always much longer and much more peopled. In fact, Scandal was originally much more peopled. George Bowden, who was the actual husband that she left after a day, appeared in the original show. That is a fabulous story, really. In
its own right, just saying that.
Just amazing, really. But of course, you know, when we did it the last time, we went from A to B. In fact, I was so worried about the death, because the trouble with people, bio things, is people die.
Yes.
I mean, everybody dies, don't they? It's a nightmare.
So the rumour has it.
Well, it's just such a downer. So we sort of confronted that head on originally, and Catherine actually ended her days in Fontainebleau in France, because there was a chap there called Gurdjieff, who was a guru and who was just starting up a special place where people could go and find themselves, you know, in a very new age way.
Yes, quite. That sounds much more 60s, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? She was actually put onto this by her old editor at the New Age, William Orage, who took her
ironic title under the circumstances.
who took her along to some of these meetings, and then when she was getting really ill, and she thought, I've got to find myself, because she had been this role player, she wanted to get within herself. So she went to this institute, and Murray didn't like it. Murray didn't like it at all that she'd gone with this. He was understandably flummoxed. And so we started the first musical with them having a set to about it, you know. I really, because it's all in the letters, I don't understand what you're doing with this. It's not the Catherine I recognise. Why are you doing this? Why are you going? And she's saying, well, because I've just got to find a way through understanding life before I go. You know, that's basically... And so we had that scene, both at the beginning and the end. And then... she collapsed at the end of that conversation, because having gone to Gurdjieff, she was told, look, it's very bad for you if he comes over and visits you earlier. But she'd been there 3 months or something, just after Christmas, she got the go-ahead from Gurdjieff, who said, I think that, you know, you're now centred enough to feel that you could, you know, sort of meet with him again. So we go to that moment, and on the night that he arrived, she actually collapsed and died. So sad, because she was so joyful at seeing him, and she did a little hop and skip up the stairs and had a hemorrhage and died. So from that, her life, like they say, your life flashes through when you're at the point of death. So we went right back to New Zealand and her family and all that stuff about what she aspired from her life. Shall I be a drudge? Shall I be a lady of the house? All those thoughts about what she was going to craft her life into was much more in a narrative style. We started there and then we worked all the way through until the end. And this time we've not. We've kind of alluded to the death because you can't get away from it, but we've sort of taken that moment, which is a very, very special moment, when she's starting to write some of her very, very best work, and she's on the threshold of being the famous, notable writer that, she now is known as.
The threshold of her greatness.
The threshold of her greatness, but she's not great, she's an ordinary person, she's not been recognised for it, and she's not yet ill. And ill people in musicals are terrible as well, because if you've got tuberculosis, you're not going to be singing.
Yeah, the dancing. Those cartwheels, right?
Yeah, not going to happen.
Well, actually, I'm really glad you did that, because there is always this danger, and you've hit the nail absolutely on the head. Stories of people who are dead, and those are the ones that quite often get featured in pieces of this nature, in the broadest sense. Finish with the death, because that is a sort of natural thing to do, but it is a downer in terms of the audience,
of course,
and also we are not who we are because of how we die, in my view. That is just a small element of who we are, and it's so easy to say that X died at 30 or 50 or 100 of this, that or the other, and then that is their story, but that isn't their story at all. That's the full stop. It's like the very final full stop in an autobiography of 700 pages or 1,000 pages or 30 pages.
Yeah.
It's because of the linear nature of many narratives, we have come to remember celebrities through their deaths so often.
Poor old Elvis Presley is a case
Marilyn
in point.
Monroe. We could probably sit here and make a list that does not stop.
Hideous.
Yeah, but we all do it, and we've all done it, and culture does it, certainly in the West. And this avoids that. It's not just a brilliant way of reimagining, of telling a narrative, telling the story. I think it's sensitive and clever and draws the attention to where it needs to go, which ultimately is her work.
Yes, because she's already immortal.
Yes, that is absolutely true. So the death part is irrelevant.
Exactly, because when I'm looking at those books on the table at the end, and she's singing, sort of, I will make my mark, I will be capable of all I am capable of becoming. And there it is. There's the written proof, and it's on the table. And she's done it.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the prose passages that you read out. There's a few moments where you very, very deftly overlap with Lily Casson, who is your daughter, I should declare, who's playing Katherine in this. She starts saying something, and then you say it at the same time and then carry on. And it's seamless for a start, so that's beautiful. But also, you have a wonderful narration skill. So when you're reading out, I've seen passages not read out well, but I've also seen passages, short passages, which can come to life and spring from the page. We're, as people, we're used to people talking to us and stories coming to, even in this day and age, in the 21st century, getting stories orally, pronouncing that A, is still a really important, the radio is still important. We pick up so much from that way, and being able to make prose live in a different way to the way we ourselves would read it, I think, actually. It's a real skill. I suppose it's a skill of the audiobook reader, isn't it? Some are terrible and some are good. Yeah. Well, if you don't mind me saying, people should be queuing up to get you to do audiobooks. And if the Katherine Mansfield estate is listening, can I put you on their list? But seriously, you also, we've been speaking about you in your capacity as adapter and composer, but we should not forget that your presence on the stage, that you're an actress, that you are able to transmute words into something which we, the audience, take home. And you use lots of different media for that. You can do it through song, you can do it through performance, you can do it through narration. These are amazing skills, and you have them in abundance. So I'm not asking you to comment on this, because that will be terribly embarrassing, but I think you're an amazing presence, and I think that your presence has really amplified the sensation of Katherine's story and how it works. So that's how it came to me. I'm coming back to a word I said at the beginning. I was beguiled by this piece. It's deftly written, if you want adjectives. What's that? That's an adverb, isn't it? Technically, let's not get that wrong. But it's deftly written. It's superbly well performed. The score is sublime. But ultimately, I think the whole piece is just beguiling.
I think the cast are fantastic, actually.
Oh, yes.
I am absolutely thrilled with the cast, because with something like this that's full of words, because I love words, to have actors who actually make the most of those words and keep the music going, and I think that this is rare skill with all three actors. I'm delighted.
And you. Yes.
Said I don't sing much in this.
No, that is the great sadness, is that we are deprived of your actual performance of songs. But the songs are marvellously written. But you're quite right. Your cast gets that absolutely across. I just thought it was a marvellous piece. You know, it's simply a wonderful thing. Where next for Two Tigers? And indeed, we should mention that you still have other shows in your portfolio which are live.
Yes.
How can people find out more about what you're doing, Sue, and this piece?
Well, our go-to is englishcabaret.co.uk, which will tell you all of our latest shows. We've got opening next week for 4 performances. We did it last year at the Edinburgh Fringe. This time we're only doing 4 performances of Dreams of Peace and Freedom, which shines a light, really, on post-war politics and how we got to where we are today. And this is really important now, I think, when we're on the brink of...
Resonates terribly importantly.
When we're on the brink of throwing it all away and pretending it didn't happen, or ignoring it, or, just not knowing about it. I think that although it is songs, it's a piece that touches people through one man's experience. And the man was David Maxwell Fyfe, who was a prosecutor at Nuremberg and then went on to craft the CHR as the British drafter, and fought to do that, and it is a wonderful legacy that we're just on the brink of dissing and throwing out with the bathwater.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, to boil this down, this is about the birth of the post-war world of human rights and cooperation. This is about trying to make the world a better place by working together. And without going too much into the ins and outs of it, we can all see that there are actors in the world who are opposing that, some of them closer to home than others. And so whatever one's view on it, it's certainly true that this, it cannot be ignored. I think it's a great thing as it happens. But I also think that Dreams of Peace and Freedom is, it's one of my all-time great shows. I love it. I've called it a secular hymn in the past, and that's exactly how it comes across. It's so odd to be moved in by something that could sound esoteric, but goodness me, it resonates with me absolutely. I strongly recommend people seeing that. So that's still having a life, not just here at Edinburgh.
So that's still having a life, because I think that you say, the Council of Europe are a one-man band really for trying to be heard.
The Council of Europe, I should tell everyone, is something which the United Kingdom is still a member of.
Not only that, they actually had, and this was not reported in the British press in any way, because our Prime Minister decided to take his press corps to Japan a few days later. But 46 member countries who are signatories to the ECHR renewed their commitment to it at Reykjavik this year in May. And therefore, the idea that we can undermine that in Parliament by passing legislation is directly against the spirit of what he signed. And that needs to be brought in, just constantly alluded to in the public domain. And if we can do that by performing something lovely, which it is, it's not a drum banging, flag waving piece, it is a very gentle, beautiful protest, then we have to do it.
It's sincere without being painfully earnest, I think is what. But it is. But people don't want preachy, and it isn't preachy. But what it is, it's sincere, but it's moving. I mean, I don't need to resell it. We've spoken about it here on Musical Talk several times before. But I'm delighted to hear that the show lives and prospers, and that there are recordings of it as well.
Yes, yeah. And we're going to get, actually, here in Edinburgh, he was educated in Edinburgh at the George Watson's Academy College, and they are doing a special performance of Dreams of Peace and Freedom in mid-September to celebrate an old Watsonian, and I'm so delighted by that, because people are ambivalent towards Maxwell Fyfe, as you know, and for him to be unadulterated in their appreciation of those things that he did, being a prosecutor, doing this ECHR, which is two good things for which somebody should be celebrated, I think is very, very wonderful of them to stand up and do that.
Well, we touch back on the complexity of human nature. Everyone has good and bad within them, and good and bad within them, and then the important thing is hopefully when you add them up at the end of the day, they're on the credit side rather than the debit side. Yeah,
it's very funny though, isn't it? Because today we went to the book festival to try and hand out some flyers, thinking, well, here we are tapping into the literati, so they should know about Katherine Mansfield. And we went in to look at the books available in the shop, and there isn't one Katherine Mansfield.
Not one at the literary festival.
Not one in her centenary year. And I was actually appalled.
Well, what were the publishers in this? Because that was like
Waterstones is the people, because we then went directly and said, we can't, sort of take any responsibility for that. Waterstones have stopped us this year. Well, Waterstones are missing a trick, because this is something that is happening. She's somebody who is equally of note.
Yeah, she is.
She is. Yeah. And it made me a bit, I was surprised that the lady who has written a biography of Katherine Mansfield was not speaking at the festival, but there may be other reasons for that. But to not stock her book, or to make a bit of a puff about one of our great modernists, did seem to be a bit of an oversight, I thought.
Couldn't agree more. But tell me more about Two Tigers then. Is this going to have a longer shelf life than the books then?
I don't know. I hope so. I mean, already I know that if we could get across to New Zealand, she's one of her own. So, but I would really like to get people to know more about Katherine Mansfield through this. But it's the same thing, Yet again, we've chosen somebody who, if I'd chosen Virginia Woolf, then that would have been fine. Yeah. Choosing Katherine Mansfield is, sort of having a little private battle, and Maxwell Fyfe is again a little private battle, because it's not cut and dried. It's not, sort of. Da!
And also, there is that element of who's getting lost to history quicker.
Yes.
Virginia Woolf is still more of a household name than Katherine Mansfield. I'm going to be honest, I didn't know very much about her. What I have discovered over the course of this Edinburgh Fringe is a lot more about her, to the point where I now want to read some of her books. So if I'm not going to be able to turn her around to her fortunes by buying one copy of each of her books, but I'm genuinely interested now in finding out more about her.
I'm very surprised that they don't have any at the Waterstones book fair, because if I always look now, at the moment, I look for Katherine Mansfield books, and the other bookshops I've been into in town have stocked her. No doubt, down on Princes Street, they probably stock her as well. And I'm concerned that it's too much about selling books and not enough about recognising the authors.
Selling, not celebrating.
That's it. Yeah, that's very good. Might use that.
Feel free. But yes, whereas I'm with you. By celebrating, you sell. That's the ironic thing is, you can get people to buy. The ultimate capitalist wish, which is to sell books. I fully understand that. I like to buy books, so that relationship works for me.
Yes.
But I want there to be. Why would I buy any book if it hasn't been celebrated in some way?
Exactly. You can only come to these things. Yes, you do have to bring it to people, and that is one of the things that bookshops are for, really. And I know that new authors need their books brought to people, but I think that other books do too. And there are interesting things, and an anniversary, as we know, is a perfect opportunity.
Jumping on point, yes.
Perfect opportunity to just sort of give a nod and move on.
So, Sue, as always, thank you for actually a fabulous conversation which became incredibly literary as well as
musical.
Yeah,
sorry about that. Yeah.
You don't have to apologise at
It's
any way.
It's going to put people off, isn't it?
No, not in any way. If people are anything like me, and I hope everyone's like me, almost no one is, but I wish they were, I think people will be genuinely interested in Katherine Mansfield, but also, I hope, in Two Tigers and your further work. So remind us again, what's the website? And
EnglishCabaret.co.uk. It tells you about all our shows, and there's no point in my telling you what time this show is on here in Edinburgh.
But if it's on after Edinburgh, the website will tell us.
And I'm hoping very much that we may get an opportunity sooner rather than later. We've had an invitation by the Katherine Mansfield Society to go and perform some songs in Fontainebleau in October around her birthday. So that would be very exciting if that comes to pass.
And people can contact you on the website.
They can.
Lovely. So if people are interested...
Also, I mean, if anybody is really interested in Katherine Mansfield, on my website, which is suecasson.co.uk, I have, while I've been doing this process, been revisiting Katherine Mansfield and writing a series of Mansfield musings. The podcast is called Mansfield Musings. And I've sort of centred on different relationships and looked at... the way that the last 35 years has changed the way we look at those in very, very short blogs, sort of not even 1,000 words.
But your takes, so that's really interesting, actually.
Yeah. Well, and I've discovered so much that way. In fact, when I started doing it, because it was my daughter who said, you've got to do something, this would be a good thing. And I said, what am I going to write about? And I've actually found it enormously useful. In fact, the latest blog that I wrote, which I wrote when we were finally putting this together, is called Why Is It a Modernist Musical?
Which is where we came in.
Which is where we came in, and it's on the English Cabaret website. Very, very short read, but it sort of encapsulates all my thinking behind what took me here. And it's, it sort of refers back to some of the other blogs that I did. So if anybody has any interest in the process of the writing and Katherine Mansfield and things, then that is there too.
An excellent resource. Well, if I may say, thank you over the course of this conversation for helping me understand what is a modernist musical, and one example of it being Two Tigers by Sue Casson is one I can absolutely recommend to anyone, either here at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, but more likely subsequently. It's a show that deserves to go forward. It has the energy of the Two Tigers and the elegance. Sue, as always, thank you very much.
Thank you very
talking
much.
To me.
Thank you.
Get him out of my mind. Each time he writes, I'm reeling from this dangerous feeling. I just can't get him out of my mind. I want him so. Couldn't know when I met him how far my thoughts would fly. Now I just can't forget him. Lord alone knows why. I can't get him out of my mind. He haunts me all day long, and when the daylight's gone, the dreaming still goes on. Can't get him out of my mind. get him out of my mind. In every face I see, his eyes look out at me. I just can't get him out of my mind. I long for him so. Love like a burning fever has laid my senses bare. Blind to the man I'm leaving, longing to be there. I can't get him out of my mind. Should I lose everything for one more blissful fling? I know I'd go to him. Can't get him out of my mind. I can't get him out of my mind. Every admiring gaze, my silent hymn of praise. I just can't get him out of my mind. He's always there, counting the days between us since last we said goodbye, craving his living in us, wishing I could fly. I can't get him out of my mind, and through the glowing flame, the beating in my brain, I feel alive again. Can't get him out of my mind.
So good, that song. And there we are, another song from Two Tigers, a modernist musical by the wonderful Sue Casson. And I do hope you enjoyed listening to her in conversation. I can't get enough of Sue's work, and I can't get enough of Sue's company. And the song that you just heard was called Can't Get Him Out of My Mind. And it was Melanie Henry playing the soprano saxophone there. And Melanie has played in many West End orchestra pits since that recording was made. And before the interview, you heard the song Home, also from Two Tigers, where Sue was singing with the accompaniment of John Jansen. And if you'd like to keep up with Two Tigers or any of the other work that Sue has produced, and more about that in just a minute, you can do so by going along, as she said, to her websites. That's www.englishcabaret.co.uk. And of course, Sue has her own website at www.suecasson.co.uk. Now, as you heard in the conversation, Two Tigers isn't the only show that Sue has currently in operation, as it were, because you can go and see one of my favourites, Dreams of Peace and Freedom, as part of the Magna Carta Progress, which will be running until November 2025. So there will be periodic performances of this magnificent show that hopefully you can find and go and see. And as she says on her website, the show Dreams of Peace and Freedom was released as a virtual production, subtitled Streams of Natural Law at this year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, but the show is currently on tour physically now. And the show is so important, as well as being absolutely at the cutting edge of debate in politics at the moment, as well as being artistically beautiful, that the production which Sue mentioned in that conversation at the George Watson School drew a review from the Scottish Legal News. Not a traditional reviewer of musical theatre, I'm sure you'll agree. Incidentally, they liked it. But it does show that it has something for everyone. And hopefully, for you. Do see if you can find it. Well, that brings this episode of Musical Talk to an end. I do hope that you've enjoyed it. Do join us again next week, or whenever, and you'll be able to hear something completely different, which is one of the joys of Musical Talk, because the broadness of what musical theatre can be means that every episode of Musical Talk is in itself a reflection of that, and can be about anything. Let's find out what it is next time. Until then, we'll probably need some kind of cliffhanger ending, so that you can wonder about that until the next episode. Well, I don't have any upbeat drum music like they use in EastEnders, but I can stop the episode, so it will be a sheer cliff face, and I'm going to do that with one single word. And you know what it is as well as I do, but I'm still going to say it. Goodbye. Goodbye. There, I've said it twice. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with Sue Casson. And my thanks go to her for allowing me to play her songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on the usual social media networks like Facebook, Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you want to follow me on the latter, you can. At Musical Talk Thos. Because the sound's so good in here, we can sort of relax.
Yeah,
so
we
don't have to lean in.
Occasionally people sort of come past, but...
that's fine, if they're not playing the trombone.
Yeah, no, they shouldn't be doing that.
And if it rains, we'll just have that staccato sound of Scotland, which I've had before. The dome, the Pleasance Dome I used to record a lot in.
Okay.
And of course it has a big circular dome.
Yeah.
And you suddenly knew when the rain was coming. It's still terribly civilised. I feel like I get used to this.
Do you know, this is a silly story, but
they're my favourite.
Tom was in this venue as a schoolboy. One of the very first times that he came here, and the show that he was doing was called Drawing Room Tragedy, which had been written by a friend of his. And they said to him, because he was the production manager, "Oh, go on, Tom, go out and get a 3-piece suite." So he went to an auction and found this. And when we came here last week, and we went downstairs, and Tom said, "That's my 3-piece suite."
So this is a proper fringe artifact.
This is actually, Drawing Room Tragedy.
That's amazing though, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's really amazing.
I hate to ask how much it costs.
I don't think I've ever asked, actually.
No. Well, it's
won't have been much, I don't think.
Yeah, worth every penny if it's still... Gosh, well, it's still serving
the
arts in every possible way.
Exactly.